Hi, I'm Caroline Bremner. I'm a Senior Industry Manager for travel at Euromonitor International. And today I'm going to be talking about some of our new research that we have on climate action in travel. Less talk, more action. So travel and tourism represents a double-edged sword for countries, particularly for fragile and natural habitats. And so while being a vehicle for job creation, prosperity and opportunity, if out of control, the sector can damage precious ecosystems and biodiversity, which is obviously a concern. Already, travel and tourism accounts for at least 8% of global carbon emissions, so already has a sizable carbon footprint and therefore bears a very large responsibility to decarbonise and to be a steward for the natural and cultural assets that it so heavily relies on. Coastal and low-lying areas are very vulnerable to climate change impacts and natural disasters such as rising sea levels and coastal erosion. And clearly this affects small island developing states the most, especially where tourism accounts for the lion's share of the economy, such as we see in the Caribbean or in the Pacific Islands. Yet despite its very high dependency on the natural world, travel businesses are not as engaged with sustainability than other industries. And so we see that 58% of travel businesses adopt strategies that put social, environmental, and economic concerns at their heart of their operations, compared to an all industry average of 66%. So there's definitely a disconnect there in terms of how much travel businesses are engaging with sustainability. That's not to say that progress isn't being made. There was an increase of 2 percentage points over 2020 to 21, which is proof that travel businesses are giving much higher priority to building back from the pandemic in a much more sustainable and client-friendly way. Also, we saw that 53% of travel brands are integrating sustainability features and initiatives into their innovation and their new product developments, and that was up significantly by 10 percentage points from last year to this year. Equally, we can see that climate action is a key pillar of sustainable tourism development. So climate action was accelerated by the pandemic, where travel was one of the first sectors to close and the last to reopen. And of course, due to the dynamically changing health situation, which has been further complicated by the Omicron variant, there's still very high levels of uncertainty, fear and doubt about what's going to happen to the future of tourism and when it will finally and ultimately see its recovery to pre-crisis levels. At best, from our latest research, we reckon it will take at least 5 years, and in a worst case scenario, it could take several years. And the new variant obviously puts a spanner in the works in terms of recovery. During the pause, travel businesses took advantage to take that time and rethink their corporate strategies and think about their impact on local destinations and communities, and looking at their supply chains to drive cost efficiencies. So from our sustainability survey research, we see that that 58% of travel companies currently engage with the Sustainable Development Goal number 13, which is on climate action specifically, and that increased very strongly by 10 percentage points over the past year. So clearly the pandemic has provided a much needed shot in the arm to focus hearts and minds. So despite showing high levels of awareness about climate change, climate action that's required, where 80% of travel businesses state that climate action is very important or extremely important to them and their business, the sector performs less well than other industries in implementing actionable strategies to achieve net zero emissions. So we see a very low level of engagement there. So only 7% of travel businesses currently have a net zero carbon strategy, which is very low compared to an industry average, and also for other sectors like automotives and finance, where up around 35% of their businesses say that they have a net zero strategy in place. So clearly, despite high levels of awareness about the need for climate action, as Greta Thunberg says, there's still far too much blah, blah, blah. Lots of talk and not enough action. So besides the need to have a more focus on net zero and changing the mindset to think net zero, there's also a lack of action concerning carbon tracking and offsetting. So of all the travel businesses that we spoke to, only 24% of them are undertaking any kind of carbon tracking. Now, this may be due to the complexities of the supply chain in tourism, where multiple players are involved, for a single trip, whether it's from the transport providers, the urban mobility, the lodging players, the activities and tour operators and tour guides. It's a very complex chain. However, not everyone is, throwing the towel in. We do have some great pioneers in the industry, such as Intrepid Travel and the Travel Corp, and they are tackling the climate change challenge head on. So along with 300 other signatories, they've recently signed up to the Glasgow Declaration, which was launched at COP26. And this declaration is a call to arms for the tourism sector to come together to decarbonise, embrace science-based targets, so listen to the science, and the aim is to cut emissions by 50% by 2030 and to truly accelerate the transition to net zero way before the 2050 deadline. So we are beginning to see much stronger signs of collaboration and partnership in the industry, which is critical if we are to achieve our climate goals. Nevertheless, we are seeing that strong leadership is falling short. Around a quarter, so only 26% of travel businesses considered that their CEO was a sustainability activist, so that's only a quarter. So this lack of drive and, dare I say it, lack of passion for instigating positive change from the top is a major hindrance to success ultimately. Equally, with that lack of drive from the top, we can see that there's a sort of corresponding lack of funding being dedicated to climate action causes. And 43% of travel businesses said that this was a major obstacle to the effectiveness of their sustainability strategies. However, we know that the investment climate in travel is extremely challenging at the moment, where last year there was an unprecedented decline of tourism spending internationally, fell by 75%. Already this year, we reckon that there'll be a shortfall of about 60% in the market, so operating at 40% capacity. So there's still very high levels of uncertainty and exacerbated by the new variant, which is ushering in a whole new range of bans and restrictions and quarantine rules. So this obviously is a very complex and dynamically changing situation. In terms of investment, we also see that there's less emphasis on energy by travel businesses. So 44% of travel companies are saying that energy is important and they're investing in that area, whereas other industries, it's up around 55%. So again, that's a little bit of an alarm bell. We need to be driving energy efficiencies and transitioning to renewables, and that's a key way to achieve decarbonisation. So we can see that travel is behind the investment curve. There's that lack of leadership, a lack of funds and investment. But that's not to say that we shouldn't be investing now in sustainable products, services, and operations, because failure to act now means that we may reach that point of no return, which will have catastrophic effects and unleash, untold damage on natural environments and beautiful places that we treasure. And of course, biodiversity and species could be lost forever. So we must avoid this lost paradise. So what we see at Euromonitor is that innovation is a key lever for driving positive change in the field of climate action. And this innovation in green technology is taking shape in many forms in the travel industry. So it's been very interesting to research this. For example, the UAE is a front runner in self-driving electric transport and is already trialing autonomous vehicles in Sharjah, Abu Dhabi, and Dubai. Of course, Dubai is famed for its flying taxis, and it has a very ambitious autonomous transport strategy where they're aiming for 25% of all trips to be self-driving or autonomous by 2030. And this transition to electric autonomous vehicles has multiple benefits, such as reducing accidents substantially, decreasing emissions by 12%, and of course, saving people millions of hours spent in traffic and congestion. So it also builds well-being and happiness, which is obviously critical. Lufthansa, the German airline, is tackling aviation's existential crisis head-on. It's been investing in sustainable development fuels for the past decade and continues to make that transition. It's also embracing a multimodal mobility approach through its partnership with Deutsche Bahn, so sort of rolling back on domestic flights where it can. And equally, it has a very strong goal to cut carbon emissions by 50% by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. Over in Norway, we can see hydrogen is being used as clean energy in ships to help protect their UNESCO World Heritage fjords. And there's a ban on carbon emissions coming in 2026. Electric ferries are already being used on short journeys, and the plan is to enable much longer journeys by larger vessels with zero emissions going from Bergen up to the Arctic by retrofitting existing vessels with hydrogen fuel cell technology. So that's an interesting development there. We're also seeing that hotels are getting in on the act, whether it's looking at new ways of accounting methods, such as the waste global accounting standards recently launched in September of this year by Accor, Hilton, IHG, Hyatt, Marriott, collaborating with Greenview and the World Wildlife Fund. Whereas we have Bikuti and Tara in Aruba, which is an award-winning independent resort with 104 rooms. It's the Caribbean's first carbon neutral hotel and has a very strong visionary approach to net zero resort stays. It's also the first hotel in the world to offer a carbon offset concierge for its guests so that they can go to the concierge and get help in offsetting other aspects of their trip, such as the transportation part. There's also a very interesting example in Chiswick, London, called Room 2, that is taking a whole life cycle approach to its operations, including the building and the building's impact on the environment and the local community. It's also set up its operations so that it's 89% more efficient than a standard hotel. So that is a serious way of reducing emissions and having a positive impact. And of course, the whole life cycle approach in terms of the building means that they look at carbon emissions during production and construction of the building, when it's in use and operation, right the way through to its end of life, to ensure that it meets very strict net zero criteria. Some of the examples, there is loads of great work being done in the green tech space, and of course it makes it very interesting to research. So in summary, what we're seeing is that we need less talk and more action. So faced with the Code Red for humanity, there is no more time for words, and talk is very cheap. So, we've seen that travel and tourism accounts for a minimum of 8% of global carbon emissions. It's sizable, and it's also expected to increase its share of the carbon budget. So the industry has an undeniable responsibility to really walk the walk when it comes to climate action. So to do that, businesses need to partner up. Travel and tourism is a very complicated beast with multiple players operating in the ecosystem, and that really demands joined up thinking. So partnership, collaboration are critical to break down the silos, to link government, communities, destination management organizations, consumers and suppliers, so everybody in the chain, and make sure that they're all pulling in the same direction to deliver on these shared goals that we have to get to net zero by 2050, and make sure that that actually happens well ahead of time. So the Glasgow Declaration puts tourism declares a climate emergency at the heart of a resilient and sustainable recovery, and it helps galvanise support for climate action. So it really is now up to travel brands to join those 300 signatories to show up and to sign up and to actually get on the path to becoming net zero. Unfortunately, there is a very large elephant in the room, which is aviation, and it is a thorn in the side of a sustainable recovery, where international aviation sits outside the Paris Agreement. However, the sector's self-imposed targets, the so-called CORSIA, will help the sector to achieve net zero by 2050. But the pace of sustainable transformation really needs to be picked up and accelerated by airlines. So adopting science-based targets, increasing the transition to sustainable aviation fuel, and innovating in terms of design, technology, and energy, of course. Already we know that there are a couple of pioneers and visionaries in the industry, such as Intrepid Travel and the Travel Corp, but these tend to be the exception rather than the rule. And so what we need is to grow and develop leaders of the future that are not only digital natives, but equally sustainability gurus who are strongly passionate about climate action. And of course, green technology is the ideal sweet spot for brands and destinations. So ultimately, that keeping an eye on the ultimate experience for consumers that is both climate positive but equally rewarding for them. So I'd like to thank you for listening today, and of course, if you have any questions about the research, please do get in touch. Thank you. Goodbye.